Hello and welcome to part 3 of my series on autism spectrum disorder. My name is James and I will be walking you through the call to action today. And the focus of this will be what behaviors can you change to help bridge the gap for autistics? So a quick refresher, what is autism spectrum disorder? So hopefully you've seen the first two parts of the series at this point, and this will be a refresher. So autism spectrum disorder is a fundamental rewiring of the brain. Think of it like operating systems in a computer. The neurotypical brain versus the autistic brain are both completely functioning on their own, but they operate in very different fashions. And specifically, these are categorized most cleanly, I think, in these 5 sections, which is social impediments, such as, difficulty having interest in people, sharing emotions, intense interests, sensitivities, routine and repetition, and communication difficulties. Now, ASD is extremely individualized, and I've touched on that before. I mean, if you've met one autistic, you've met one autistic. And so I'm really leery of giving advice that will work for me, but won't be helpful for 90% of autistics who, you may end up communicating with. And so I'm going to avoid 4 of these, and I'm going to instead focus all of my effort on communication difficulties, because this is the most common bridging interaction between autistics and non-autistics. I mean, autistics can manage their other impairments in other ways that I know for me, myself, my routine and repetition, my sensitivities, the ones that I have, I tend to control myself, but communication, it doesn't matter where I go. It doesn't matter what I do. I can't get away from people, and I can't get away from the need to interact with them. And so I'd really like to focus on that, because I think we're going to get the most, value for that conversational topic. Now, so remember, when we talk about communication difficulties, what we really mean is that the neurotypical brain and the autistic brain don't communicate the same way. Neither side is wrong. They're just different operating systems. And so our goal here is really just finding that bridge, that connector, that conversion cable that helps us, understand each other. For example, I know I tend to speak very directly, and I don't always control my tone well. So sometimes I can say something in a tone that sounds like it's sarcasm when it's not. And I have to be aware of that. And for neurotypicals tend to speak cryptically, use interpretive dance to convey complex messages, and say things they don't mean. I've covered that before, but it's still important to remember really where we both fall on these things. And so what's the solution? And the solution, I think, is very simple. Assume positive intent. And I know that sounds a little preachy and it sounds a little self-explanatory, but I can't tell you how many, it's so many. I can't tell you how many misunderstandings I've gotten into for no more complex a reason than this. One example I guess I'll toss out is I was giving feedback to someone on a presentation. This was just some random peer. This wasn't a close friend. It was just someone we were doing cycling presentations as a part of the program I was in. And after this individual finished their presentation, I said, "Hey, nice job." Well, somewhere between the two of us, my intent must have gotten lost, because his response was to huff and just walk away from me. And it wasn't until later, about 3 days later, through the grapevine, that it got back to me that I had insulted the quality of his presentation. And so, of course, I'm replaying this in my head. Well, I said, "Nice job." Either I messed up my tone, maybe he was having a bad day and didn't feel he did well and just thought I was, being sarcastic. Whatever the cause was, we didn't land in the same place. And if positive intent had been assumed, if it hadn't just been assumed that I was just randomly being a jerk, this wouldn't have happened. And I mean, absolutely, I want to be clear. I'm not shuffling off responsibility for this, because absolutely I have to own how people are understanding my communication, but it's a real struggle for me. And so I need a little bit of help bridging that gap, which brings me to part 2, to step 2 here of, how we can help bridge this gap, which is accountability. First step, assume positive intent. But if after assuming positive intent, there's that I do or say something that offends, it's really pivotal that I find out about it. Because in that example I just gave, we played this game of telephone. I guarantee you, I didn't know. I will virtually never be the one that's aware if I've offended someone. And when it's let to run its course, we spent 3 days with, a telephone game of gossip where now everyone thinks that I'm being a jerk, when the reality is I definitely didn't mean that way. And if this individual instead just say, "Hey, why are you being so mean?" I would have been like, "What are you talking about? I sincerely thought you did a good job." That would have been the end of it. This never would have gone anywhere. And in fact, we would have, grown a little closer from oh, sometimes I have a hard time understanding, how you're approaching things. I'm like, "Oh, I'm sorry. I mean, my tone can come off a little confusing sometimes. I promise I'm never trying to be insulting." I mean, just think about how much time we saved having a more direct conversation. And I appreciate that people don't enjoy confrontation. I get that. That's why we're trying to find both perspectives here to kind of find a way to merge this. And so I'm very cautious with what I say. I try to make sure I'm saying things carefully, but I'm really leery of relationships, festering and souring just because we didn't take the time to talk about something that upsets someone instead of, just avoiding the topic. And so it's really, really important to me that people hold me accountable. Now, some of you have likely noted that this advice is very generic, and you are absolutely right. These are both regularly taught components of neurotypical education in emotional intelligence classes, and there's a reason for that. And the reason for that is this isn't just about me. If I hadn't told you I was autistic, most of you would likely never know. Autism spectrum disorder is an invisible disability. You don't get to look at me and know I'm autistic. So the notion that I can prepare you for how to speak to someone who's autistic is a little silly, because you're not just gonna we don't go around wearing a multicolored A branded on our chest to let people know that we communicate differently. And so the generic advice is generic because it's usable everywhere. And more importantly, and I mean this very sincerely, probably 90% of my sour interactions, my challenging communication difficulties arise from these two things, because someone doesn't assume positive intent and they don't hold me accountable. And instead, it just goes off into the world and it's just a snowball going downhill. It just grows and grows and grows until eventually I notice. And by then it's way too late for me to try and control and help fix whatever's going on here. And so it's really, really important to me that folks appreciate the simplicity of a lot of the solution here. I have my share of autistic challenges outside of communication difficulties. I have sensitivities. I have, my own routine and repetitions that I need, but these are highly individualized, and I will engage, with the folks that are relevant to that. And I'll take care of that on my own, as I presume most of, my autistic comrades will also do. So when it comes to these basic communication difficulties, we all, not just autistics, but every one of us, we all deserve to be treated better. And neither I nor anybody else should need a label to get that treatment better. So with that, I will keep today's discussion very short. I know the last one went a little long. And so what's next? So the next thing I want to talk about is allies and advocacy enunciation. And the focus for this one is really going to be on broader research organizations, who's doing the work in autism, who should you look to for answers, or rather at least, resources I believe are good sources for the autistic community's opinions on how the world is shaping and changing from our perspective. Just to try and help give you something to ground you if you are interested in looking for more, as well as the ability to understand enough to help educate others should they come looking for answers, and then where to point them. So that'll be the focus of part 4. That'll be for next Monday. I appreciate you joining me for this one, and have a wonderful day. Thanks. Goodbye.